just like to express this one thing. All these girls be like, thank you to my man. And I want to say, to my hands, thank you to my hands. To my hands, thank you to my hands. Listen, from me knowing how to fight and me training hard, I make millions of dollars just from beating people up. So, to my hands, thank you to my hands. To my hands, thank you to my hands.
A single pair of sunglasses ended up exposing cracks in an entire relationship. And the moment it happened, the reaction that followed made it impossible for anyone watching to ignore what was really going on. What unfolded involving Papoose, Claressa Shields, and Remy quickly became one of the most talked about situations online. Messy, emotional, and at times genuinely uncomfortable to watch. There's no way to soften it, so it's best to approach it directly. It all began with what should have been a routine interview. Papoose sat down with DJ Vlad, appearing composed, confident, and fully in control. He had been making media rounds, speaking with energy and enthusiasm about his music, business ventures, and career moves. On the surface, everything felt standard. Another interview, another opportunity to reinforce his public image. But then something shifted, and it was subtle enough that many people might have missed it at first. There was a moment during the conversation where his demeanor noticeably changed. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't come with an announcement. Instead, it showed up in the smallest details: his posture, his tone, and the way he carried himself. If you weren't paying close attention, it could have easily gone unnoticed. But for those who were watching closely, and clearly for Claressa Shields as well, it stood out in a way that couldn't be ignored. To understand her reaction later, it's important to focus on what she saw in that moment. Because that brief shift is what seemed to disrupt everything. It challenged whatever sense of stability or reassurance she may have felt in the relationship. And once you recognize it, her response begins to make a lot more sense. For most of the interview, Papoose appeared relaxed and engaged. He spoke openly about his career, his deals, and his international experiences. His energy was consistent, and his presence felt grounded. But the moment Remy Ma's name entered the conversation, everything changed. His body language dropped, his voice softened, and he began avoiding direct eye contact. It was an immediate and noticeable shift. Then came the detail that caught the most attention. He put on sunglasses. On its own, that might not seem significant. People wear sunglasses all the time. But in this context, it felt different. This wasn't a casual outdoor setting or a stylistic choice made at the start of the interview. It happened right when the conversation turned toward his past relationship. Considering that he has done countless interviews without any attempt to conceal his expressions, the timing raised questions. It didn't come across as a fashion decision. Instead, it felt like a deliberate move to create a barrier, to hide something. Whether that was emotion, discomfort, or something deeper, viewers were left to interpret it on their own. But the overall impression was clear. He anticipated that discussing Remy Ma would affect him, and he didn't want that reaction to be visible. That moment alone was enough to spark conversation, but the interview didn't stop there. As the discussion continued, DJ Vlad brought up a particularly sensitive period, between 2023 and 2024, when Remy Ma was publicly linked to battle rapper Easy the Block Captain. At the time, she and Papoose were still legally married, which added another layer of complexity to the situation. When asked how that period affected him, Papoose didn't give a dramatic or overly detailed response. Instead, he remained measured, choosing his words carefully. However, even without explicit statements, his tone, pauses, and delivery conveyed something deeper. There was weight behind what he was saying, an emotional residue that suggested the situation hadn't been fully resolved internally. He hinted at a confrontation, referencing what appeared to be a physical altercation involving Easy. While he didn't elaborate, the implication alone was enough to indicate that the situation had been intense and personal. Then came a phrase he repeated more than once. Family is everything. At first glance, it might sound like a general statement, something people say often. But in this context, it carried more meaning. The repetition made it feel intentional, almost like he was grounding himself in that idea. Family comes first, he emphasized again. That raises an important question. Who is he referring to when he talks about family? Given his history, the answer isn't ambiguous. His long-standing relationship, his marriage, and the life he built over the years all point back to Remy Ma. And that's where things become complicated, because Claressa Shields is fully aware of that history. She understands the significance of those words and what they might imply. The interview then took another turn, one that directly impacted her. DJ Vlad brought up a claim that Claressa Shields herself had made publicly in multiple interviews, that Papoose covers all her expenses. According to her, he handles everything, from housing and transportation to travel and lifestyle costs. It was a clear narrative she had been presenting. So when Vlad mentioned it, Papoose was given a straightforward opportunity to confirm it. All he had to do was agree. But he didn't. Instead of validating the claim, he redirected the conversation. He began talking about his own accomplishments, his deals, his jewelry, his lifestyle, and his career achievements. He focused on himself rather than addressing the specific statement. Then he mentioned something that stood out: false narratives. He didn't directly accuse anyone, but the implication was clear enough. By bringing up false narratives in that moment, he suggested that not everything being said publicly aligns with reality. That single statement created a noticeable gap between what had been presented by Claressa Shields and what he appeared willing to support. Whether intentional or not, it introduced doubt. If her claims were accurate, confirming them would have been simple. The fact that he chose not to, and instead hinted at inconsistencies, raised questions. Some might argue that he was simply being private or avoiding personal topics. That's a fair possibility. But in a situation where a public narrative has already been established, silence or deflection can sometimes speak louder than confirmation. And that brings us to her reaction. After the interview aired, clips began circulating of Claressa Shields going live and addressing the situation. She was visibly upset, frustrated, emotional, and at times confrontational. During the live stream, she lashed out at bloggers and critics, calling people broke, accusing others of spreading lies, and insisting that the truth had not yet been told. Her response was intense and immediate. However, there was one notable detail. Despite repeatedly demanding that people tell the truth, she didn't clearly identify which specific claims were false or provide direct evidence to counter them. Instead, her focus remained on broad accusations and personal attacks. That type of reaction often shifts the conversation rather than resolving it. When criticism is met primarily with aggression rather than clarification, it can create the impression that something deeper is being avoided. Looking at the situation as a whole, the timing of everything is important. She watched the interview. She saw his emotional shift when Remy Ma was mentioned. She noticed the change in his body language, his tone, and the moment he chose to hide behind sunglasses. Then, almost immediately afterward, she saw him decline to support a narrative she had been publicly promoting. Those two moments happened back to back. There was no time to process them privately, no opportunity to step back and reflect. Instead, they unfolded in real time, in front of a large audience. That kind of exposure can amplify emotions, making reactions more immediate and, sometimes, more intense. From her perspective, it likely felt like two separate realizations hitting at once: that he may still carry emotional ties to his past relationship, and that he was not fully aligned with how their current relationship was being presented publicly. That combination can be difficult to navigate. Rather than addressing it privately, though, she chose to respond publicly. And that decision added another layer to the situation, turning what might have been a personal issue into a widely discussed topic. As more people began analyzing the situation, additional questions emerged, particularly regarding how the relationship began. Some reports suggest that Claressa Shields may have initiated contact during a period when Papoose was dealing with personal challenges. If accurate, that would present a different dynamic than the one that has been publicly portrayed. Instead of being pursued, she may have taken the lead in establishing the connection. That doesn't necessarily change the validity of the relationship, but it does shift the narrative. Observers have also pointed out a pattern in how certain claims are addressed. Rather than offering detailed timelines or direct rebuttals, responses have often included general dismissals and criticism of others. Clear, evidence-based clarifications have been less consistent. At the same time, public statements about future plans, such as having a child together, have added another dimension. While these statements can signal commitment, some interpret them as an attempt to reinforce stability in a situation that may still be evolving. Another factor that continues to draw attention is the contrast in communication. When Papoose speaks about his past relationship and his family, his tone often appears more emotional and grounded. In contrast, when discussing his current situation, some observers perceive less depth or intensity. That difference has fueled ongoing speculation about where he stands emotionally. Some commentators believe that lingering emotional ties to his past could be affecting his ability to fully invest in the present. If that's the case, it could create an imbalance, one that makes it difficult for the current relationship to feel secure or stable. Public attention around the situation continues to grow, but it's important to distinguish between visibility and support. High levels of attention often come from controversy rather than approval. Financial claims have also remained a point of discussion. Questions about inconsistencies between past financial disputes and current statements have contributed to ongoing skepticism. At the same time, it's important to acknowledge that Claressa Shields' professional achievements are not in question. Her success and accomplishments in her field are well established and widely respected. However, critics argue that the way this situation has been handled publicly could influence how she is perceived beyond her career. Legal factors add yet another layer. Reports indicate that Papoose's previous marriage has not been fully finalized, meaning the current relationship exists within an unresolved legal context. Combined with visible emotional ties, this has intensified both public interest and scrutiny. In the end, the situation remains complex, with multiple perspectives and unanswered questions. What stands out most is that the key insights haven't come from speculation alone. They've come from the words, actions, and reactions of those directly involved. And sometimes, it's not the loudest moments that reveal the most. It's the subtle ones, the shift in tone, the avoided eye contact, the decision to put on a pair of sunglasses, that end up telling the deeper story.